Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Lifting the Iceberg podcast. My name is Tyler James Berger and I'm joined today by Alexa Spaddy, an artist and graphic designer based out of the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors who designed the logo for this podcast. Through discussing this image, I hope to explain what this podcast is all about, what the inspiration for it is, what the core themes are, and how each episode will be structured. I'm so excited to finally be starting this epic creative journey, and I hope this podcast can grow to be something that adds value to the lives of everyone who listens. So thanks for joining me, and now let's lift the iceberg with Alexa Spaddy. Hey Alexa, thanks for doing this. I'm so excited for the conversation that we're about to have. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
So my mission for this podcast is to explore and illuminate the mysteries of the human experience. It's a broad mission statement, but this podcast is going to be a broad exploration. But with that being said, I think that as this podcast progresses, central themes will delineate themselves more clearly. And some of these themes I'm interested in are represented in the Lifting the Iceberg graphic. So through discussing the elements in this image with you, I hope to express my core curiosities that drive the questions that I ask and the discussions that I have on this podcast, as well as I want to explore your creative journey with bringing this image into being.
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it. So obviously, the first symbol is the symbol of the iceberg.
Right.
And the iceberg is just a classic symbol of the mind. There's the classic aphorism, though, but just the tip of the iceberg. You know, that always...
Or iceberg straight ahead.
Iceberg straight ahead. But, you know, the iceberg is a great symbol for the mind in that it represents it as being disproportionately buoyant between the conscious and the unconscious dimensions, you know? So lifting the iceberg is my metaphor that means to explore and to bring to the surface all of which the underside of the iceberg archetypally represents. Another thing that the lifting the iceberg metaphor means to me is the Jungian idea of the illumination of the shadow. The idea of the necessity to integrate the unknown, as well as the discovered, often uncomfortable truths that blossom from the unknown. So when I thought of this title, I thought that it was something I could really put my overarching mission behind without feeling like I was being too broad or being too limitingly concise, you know?
Yeah.
And in my original drawing, people will be able to see on the Instagram post my original drawing that I handed to you when I asked you to do this piece, and all
which I still have.
Yeah, and all the different stages of the piece up until what we have now. And in my original drawing, I had so many iconic elements flowing out of the iceberg itself. I wanted a graphic that could somehow represent the breadth of my interest and could also stand alone as a statement to what this podcast is all about. So I thought the best way to do that was the exploding head motif.
Of course.
Yeah. I knew that this was something that you would do an amazing job with because you really are an expert at collaging and integrating multiple elements into one coherent design. And also, like I said to you when I asked you to make this piece, I wanted you to make this because out of all the artists that I know, you knew me the best. And I knew that you would inevitably combine elements into it that you feel represented me. For example, the city. I didn't have the idea to have the New York City skyline in this piece, but you told me that New York City was such an important part of my path and that you felt it should be integrated into this piece. And I obviously agreed.
And why?
Well, because it's almost something that I didn't think to put it in because I guess I was in it, you know? It took someone who didn't live in the city to tell me that the city was a big part of my path.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And to see it that way.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad you could add personal elements into the mix. I kind of like trusted you on that. I also knew the potential of your style from when you created the psychedelified love logo for me a few years back, the classic love design by Robert Indiana. If you've ever been to Philadelphia, I'm sure you've passed by Love Park.
Yeah.
It's the love sign with.
It's what Philly's known for.
It's what Philly's known for.
The Eagles winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and the art museum and Rocky running up the art museum and cheesesteaks maybe.
Cheesesteaks.
Yeah, but so you made that design for me back when I was organizing a psychedelic society in Philadelphia, which I called Psychedelphia. And you combined multiple elements in that piece so well that I knew you could do what I had been imagining for this piece.
And also I feel like you said a little bit, you've trusted me enough to allow me. I've never felt really restricted by any of the projects that we've worked on together. Like you wanted elements specifically included, but you didn't really care how I did it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
because everything that I asked you to do was kind of like how this podcast is. You know, it's not too broad, but it's not too concise. Yeah. I gave you...
it's got wiggle room.
It's got wiggle room, but not too much wiggle room.
But you got to be able to have a floor to get jiggy with.
Yeah, exactly. You need a foundation and to build a house, you know. You build any house you want, but you need a foundation. Yeah. And I think that general foundation was the exploding head motif, and it was also the core elements that I just really wanted to be in the design that I feel really represented my interests.
Well, what are some of those elements?
Well, the first element that I really want to talk about is the allusion to prehistoric cave art. So this is an interest of mine that I feel really gets at one of the main questions that consumes my curiosity, which is, what is art, and why would humans even evolve such an ability to make art? Like the capacity for art, it's often listed as one of the things that separates human beings from other animals. And of course, there are other animals that you could consider to be able to create art. A classic example is the bowerbird. The bowerbird, which creates this like ornamental nest as like kind of this external peacock feather.
Or like the what's that type of fish?
The fish that creates the sand
like
mandala.
The mandala.
Yeah. So you could consider that that's art, because these fish are very conscientiously designing these installations, but it's always for the purpose of attracting mates. And you could say that that's the human propensity to create art is just a way of attracting mates. There's a good book on that by a guy named Jeffrey Miller called The Mating Mind, which he talks about all human creativity is really just an internalized peacock feather that we create our art to advertise our genetic prowess, you know, that our genes deserve to be passed on. But that is not the case with humans, I don't think. So I kind of part with that book a bit, in that visionary art is the aspiration to bring into material existence the experience had in an altered state of consciousness. You know, like I know people who have had a powerful psychedelic experience, and it's combined with the urge to somehow like put a rope around it and put a cage around it, a lasso, exactly, and reel it in and bring it back in some kind of way that can be shared with others. You know, that doesn't seem to be just another way of finding a mate. You know, it's accompanied by this deep creative urge
to like bring your heart's iconography
into
that
life.
Inner world, into the outer.
And no other animal does that
we know of.
But even if another animal did, regardless, the capacity that humans have to create art is a wonder to behold.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got thumbs. So
we got thumbs. Yeah, we got thumbs. I mean, dolphins can make some cool bubbles.
Dolphins are awesome.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about dolphins for 3 hours, so we won't go down
on
that
another
route.
podcast.
Dolphins aren't in the graphic, though.
Yeah, that's okay.
I know. Just
maybe in future versions of the graphic, we'll put some dolphins swimming in the sky or something in the river.
Doing
some pink
flops.
Dolphins in the river.
Love it.
Yeah. But getting back to cave art, so what is art and why would humans evolve the ability for art? Mm-hmm. This is a question I explored deeply in an academic context during college. I hold a bachelor's degree in psychology from Temple University, and my focus was in something called quantum evolutionary psychology, which was looking at all of the bits and pieces. The word quantum means like bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. So quantum physics is studying the bits and pieces of the universe, the quarks and atoms and such. So I studied the bits and pieces of the evolutionary process, which led humans to where we are now. We looked at everything from creation myths and the physics of existence to the development of self-reflection in primates. And the aspect of human evolution that I was most interested in was the evolution of art as it relates to the mystical religious experience as brought about by psychedelic substances. So that's something I deeply explored. But to study the evolution of art, I obviously needed to go back to the first examples of art ever created, the prehistoric cave art of Africa and Europe, the oldest examples of art that have been found so far. And when you look at these early pieces of art, you don't see only literal representations of animals or hunting scenes, but you see geometric patterns that aren't found in nature. Not something you would see on a stroll through the woods.
Like what?
Like different kinds of beings called a therianthrope. So like a therianthrope is a being that is half animal and half man. And you see in a lot of the early cave art, people depicting non-human entities. So this would be one of the earliest artifacts is a half human, half lion person, the body of a man and the head of a lion. And they obviously weren't seeing that in their environment. That's an imaginative creation. So the traditional explanation of cave art, that early humans were just reproducing scenes from their physical environment, it doesn't explain this large majority of abstract and imaginative imagery. And this is where the work of a guy named David Lewis Williams comes in. Lewis Williams is a professor of cognitive archaeology at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, and he formulated the neuropsychological model of cave art. This is so cool. He was the first to integrate the research on form constant imagery with the study of cave art. And form constants are the universal patterns hallucinated during altered states of consciousness. These are the patterns of hallucination that seem to derive from the structure of the human nervous system itself, meaning that all people who enter certain altered states of consciousness and then the hallucinations that come from that, no matter what their cultural background, are liable to perceive the same patterns in their hallucinations. These reoccurring patterns have been confirmed by laboratory research studying the effects of psychedelics. These patterns are like, they include dots, zigzags, parallel lines, grids and lattices, cobwebs and spirals, and honeycomb patterns. So these like basic geometric patterns that are seen on so much of early evidence of art.
Yeah.
So the
all
oldest
over the
cave
world.
art all over the world.
Yeah.
So places separated by thousands of miles.
Now, do you think it's because they were on psychedelics or?
Well, so that's a good question. And David Lewis Williams he suggested that these were the result of hallucinations in altered states of consciousness. But altered states can be triggered through a variety of means, such as prolonged fasting, breath work, ecstatic dance, sensory deprivation.
But I was going to say, like, being in a dark cave, you can't see.
Exactly.
You know, if you close your eyes, sometimes...
A cave is nature's sensory deprivation tank, you
right.
know? And I wonder if they went into a cave, A, to hide from the weather,
right?
But B,
and
pray and just sit in these dark spaces. And then in the absence of external stimulus, your mind creates its own stimulus.
I know. I mean, even if you just close your eyes, sometimes you can see these simple sort of design
closed eye
elements that you're talking
visuals,
about.
CEVs,
like dots and swirls and zigzags and.
But I do think that psychedelics did play a huge role, as they are the most surefire way of achieving a trance state, and they have a history of use that probably goes back to before we were even human. You know, and there are even depictions of mushrooms in these cave paintings.
Well, how do you think that they got mushrooms?
By picking them off the ground.
Just picking them up.
Yeah. Why not a juicy mushroom, a juicy, delicious looking mushroom?
Before you even called it mushroom?
Before language existed for that?
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, perhaps. I mean...
Like what? I wonder what...
If it looks delicious, wouldn't you eat it?
It looks like a duck and quacks like a duck.
Yeah. I mean, that was Terence McKenna's idea.
Yeah.
With the stoned ape theory being that early primates came out of the jungles onto the plains and came across the dung of ungulate animals like cows and deer. Ungulate meaning like an animal with hooves. Whose like cow dung is prime substrate for mushrooms to grow on. So when you go out into the prairie and there's nothing but cow shit all over you, sometimes you find a mushroom or two.
Yeah, and you're just like, well, the poop smells bad, but the mushrooms
cool. Taste good.
Yeah.
And then it would only take one person to experiment to then transmute that information to other people in the tribe. You know,
just one look.
Yeah, but I mean, there's obviously evidence for this stuff, and the cave painting illusion in the Lifting the Iceberg graphic is a piece that shows a little man with one hand on a mushroom and the other hand turning into a form constant spiral. That's the piece that I asked you to put under the tree. And that seems to be the most direct evidence that these states were facilitated by psychedelics. It's like, here's this little guy, one hand on the mushroom, other hand turning into this like super psychedelics abstract spiral. It's like, okay, that plus that equals that.
1 + 1 = 2. You know, there's no denying.
And the tree graphic, the tree design in the graphic is blooming with the form constant spiral as well. And that's another allusion to this phenomenon. So during my presentation on this topic, I did a qualitative analysis on contemporary visionary art and illustrated the similarities between early cave art and modern visionary art. And the similarities I found were amazing. The congruencies between early cave paintings and the kind of designs that are in contemporary visionary art. So I looked at a lot of Alex Gray's work, which includes the spiral lattice, such as his painting Dying, which is on the cover of DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and also Collective Vision, that clear spiraling lattice pattern is reproduced in so much visionary art. I looked at Karen Charles's piece, Honey Drizzle, that shows the honeycomb pattern clearly, and that's an amazing psychedelic representation of that. But one of my favorite examples was a piece called Spirit Bear by Simon Hajduk. And Spirit Bear, that piece has dots and spirals and honeycombs and allusions to like xenolinguistics even. So if you want to check that out, the piece is called Spirit Bear by Simon Hajduk, and you'll really see the expression of form constant imagery in psychedelic art. And I talked to him about this. I asked him if he had any idea what form constant imagery was, that there was a fundamental, a reproducible set of patterns to the psychedelic experience, and he had no idea that what that was. He's just reproducing something that he's seen under the influence of psychedelics. What are some other contemporary visionary artists that you feel express some of these like fundamental patterns?
I mean, Alison Gray. You brought up Alex, and he definitely depicts that for sure. And I think Allison does a beautiful job at making something so intricate with something as simple as the square. A square, much like a hexagon, is a infinite repeating pattern. You go up, down, left, right, infinitely in all directions. And she kind of maps it out in a way where she makes almost like a mandala out of it too. With her, she has 3 major motifs: chaos, order, and secret writing. And with order specifically, it's
those grid patterns,
very grid-like, very structured, and through the use of spectral coloring, she's able to create these radiant examples of a visionary experience. I would say that her work is less about the narrative of what you're seeing and more about what you're feeling. Much like, and I used to hate modern art, honestly, but then I learned that the whole point of modern art is to put you into a state of experience and to remove any sort of idea of what you think you're looking at. And it's really to get as close as you can to the piece so that your peripheral vision is also the piece, like a Jackson Pollock or an Alison Gray or any sort of abstract
to immerse
artist,
yourself in it.
So you become part of that world.
Yeah.
And I think Alison does an amazing job at it in a way that's so well done and frosty.
And she pulls her inspiration from these visionary experiences.
Oh yeah.
So, and that's what I'm really interested in, is how the imagination works during these experiences and where this content comes from.
Yeah.
So, I mean, on the subject of cave art, this is what I wrote my bachelor's thesis on during my time at Temple. And if you're interested in reading my thesis, you can check that out on liftingtheiceberg.com. And that paper has all of my citations and sources with it too. So if you're interested in further reading, you can check that out. But now I'd like to talk about how my interest in this leads into my other interests in altered states and the mystical experience in general. Now, the question that this phenomenon poses, where is this imagery had? Where is this imagery had during the altered states coming from? Where are these things? What is their source? Is it simply a manifestation of the way our nervous system hallucinates? Is this just what we see when the brain is being tripped? Or do altered states of consciousness connect us with and give us a window to another dimension from which we're pulling these images and these entities from? And there are so many fascinating answers to that question, and I'm really looking forward to exploring that on my podcast, because there's so many different ways you can go with that question. And
it's the ultimate question.
And some people would consider it an unanswerable question, but I think that it can be explored. And either way, it's valuable, because it could be that through the psychedelic experience, we get a bridge into the unconscious. And it's a way of analyzing the dream content of our imagination in a way that we can qualitatively analyze to come to a better understanding of ourselves and how we perceive the world,
For sure. Yeah. Well, and like how we kind of were talking about this the other day of, Dennis McKenna, he got asked that question of what is this source, you know, and specifically to people who feel that they've had contact with sensed presences or, you know, entities, aliens. And his whole thing was like, yes, this is an important question to explore, and we should explore it. But I think the ultimate question beyond the ultimate question is, well, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, what do we do about it? What do we do with it?
Yeah. Exactly. And how can we relate to each other while also projecting our own unique side of the mountain, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to look at what these spaces, what these experiences inspire people to do, you know, what comes from it.
What's the call to action?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what effects of this experience ripples out into the rest of society, or the process of human evolution in general. You know, if it triggered the evolution of art, what else could it trigger?
Yeah.
You know? And it seems that, you know, regardless of the source of the space, it seems that the shamanic visionary experience brought about by altered states of consciousness is the fundamental source of religious experience. You know, this is why the tree in the Lifting the Iceberg piece has its roots in the honeycombs, another form constant pattern, housing all the different religious and mystical symbols that I'd asked you to put into it. Because I believe that the experience that influenced the first artistic inclinations in man is the same experience from which all religions are founded upon. It's the unitive mystical experience, you know? This is why I'm interested in studying so many different religious traditions from all parts of the world, in the same way that I'm interested in studying all art from all over the world, because it is through finding what Aldous Huxley would call the perennial philosophy, the common philosophy that threads through all religions, that we can get closer to source with a capital S, you know, the source that feeds into all of our visionary, mystical, and religious experiences. The honeycombs of all the religious symbols also turns into the way, El Camino de Santiago, which is colloquially called the way. Colloquially, how about that for a word?
That's a word.
I just pulled that one up. Where'd that come from?
It's like hierarchical.
Hierarchical, colloquially speaking, it's hierarchical.
Colloquially.
But so El Camino de Santiago is a religious pilgrimage that I had walked in 2017 that spanned from France to the west coast of Spain.
How long?
It was 900 kilometers, the distance I walked, which was about 750 miles.
You walked 750 miles.
I walked 8 hours a day for a month. And that for me was... Wow. The pilgrimage for me is one of the most fundamental religious modalities. A means to mystical experience that exists in all cultures, you know? Yeah. All cultures have a pilgrimage. Yeah. All cultures have that journey, whether it be to Mecca or to any sacred site. People will walk incredible amounts of distances to get to a particular ending point. And that is something that is so old and integrated into culture that it has various effects on the mind. You know, I feel like the pilgrimage is a psychedelic in itself, and that's something I'm really interested in exploring on this podcast, because El Camino for me was probably the most potent primary religious experience that I've ever had. So that was a necessary part to include in this piece.
Well, and you pretty much had everything stolen from you except your passport before you even, just to give our listeners a little bit of perspective here, you had everything stolen from you. Your wallet, 2 times, your wallet, your laptop, your phone, a camera probably.
Yeah, my laptop, my iPod.
That's what it was.
My tablet, my camcorder, my phone, my debit card, all my money. The only thing that wasn't stolen from me was, at least the second time I got robbed twice.
Before you even started
the second
the
time I
Camino.
got robbed was like 2 days before I started the Camino. And I had left my clothes on the beach while I went swimming in the ocean. And while I was in the water, someone had come by to my stuff and went through my wallet. They pulled out my passport, left it on the ground, and took everything else. So, man, like, I'm angry that I got robbed that time. But hey, if I met that robber, I would like to shake their hand.
Well, I feel like in some weird way, and then this goes back to that fundamental question of, is there source or is it just all in our head? But in the idea of thinking maybe it was like a godly presence at play, they really did you a favor, like you said.
It did feel like it was supposed to happen.
All distraction.
Yeah.
And you really, I mean, how did you know where you were going on the Camino?
At first I was really worried. At first I thought that I would need my phone for some sense of direction, for some navigation, which I had been traveling in Europe for 2 months before that, just backpacking around, and my phone was a crucial part for me to get around. But after I got my phone stolen, I managed to get up north to the northern side of France, where Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port is, the town from which I left to start the Camino. And luckily, along the Camino, there are yellow arrows just spray painted on things during the path that just lead you in the right direction. So I didn't really need any maps.
Did you ever get lost?
I did get lost. Only once, though.
Tell me
and
that.
That was a really powerful experience for me, because I had left really early in the morning. All the pilgrims leave around like maybe 5:30 a.m.
It's probably beautiful.
It's beautiful, yeah, seeing the sunrise. And I was walking until from 5:30 a.m. until about 4:30 in the afternoon, with only maybe like a half-hour break. Like this is like midway through the pilgrimage, so I'm good at just walking continuously. But when 4:30 rolls around, it's still like early in the afternoon, and I wasn't completely beat yet. I felt like I had maybe 1 more hour left. And I looked at my little list of the towns along the Camino. It wasn't a map, but it was just a list of the towns, how many albergues or like little hostels for pilgrims that town had, and how many miles apart each town was. So the town I was in, I found that on the list, and then I saw that the next albergue was only 6 kilometers away, which would only take me about like an hour. So I'm like, okay, I got another hour left in me.
Let's just do it.
Let's just do it. So I just walked. I was walking for an hour, and I didn't see anything around me. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm just tired and like walking slow. Maybe it's around the next bend. So it's always around the next bend. That was a joke on the Camino when people were really tired and like, oh, where's the albergue? Just around the bend. So then I kept walking. Then it was like an hour and a half, still nothing. 2 hours, still nothing. And that's
starting to get dark out.
It was starting to get dark out, and I looked around, and I was in the middle of a valley. Like there was nothing on all sides of me. No people at all. People stop walking around 1. Only the crazy assholes like me keep walking after 1 p.m. Most people only walk like 6 or 7 hours. Because that's a lot of walking. So in that moment, like, I kind of had a breakdown. You know, I didn't know I didn't know how far the next albergue was. I was running out of water. I didn't know how far the next albergue was in front of me. I didn't even want to think about how long I had been walking already.
Right. That would,
because that's just just talk about a panic attack. So I remember just walking on this path, and just I stopped and I screamed as loud as I could. I made the loudest possible noise that my body could make, and I just knew there was no one that heard me. And that was a really we don't often have those experiences.
No.
You know, I live in New York City now. I'm in yelling distance of 1,000 people at every moment.
I mean, even where I live in wooded areas, but you still have
people around
and houses.
But
so
then
unreal.
In that moment, I just needed to kind of by necessity, I adopted this state of presence that I wasn't thinking about the future. I wasn't thinking about the past, because I couldn't think about either of those things, because it wouldn't allow me to keep walking. I needed to do whatever could let me keep functioning,
which was literally
just
being
present, being here now.
Wow.
So it was a forced state of presence that I had to put myself in, and I just continued to walk. And I told myself that I would walk until it got dark, and I would just have to lay down somewhere, which that would have been bad because it's windy, it gets cold at night.
Are there animals?
There might be some. I never heard anything about animals in the part of Spain that I was in at
Except
that time.
that one time when you said you were at one of the hostels. How do you pronounce it?
Albergues.
Mm-hmm. And the guy had 2 wolves.
Oh, yeah. Well, those were pet wolves. You know,
just
that
ridiculous.
Was crazy.
If you guys ever do the Camino, bring a friend.
Yeah,
it sounds like. Or
don't bring a friend. You'll find friends.
You'll find friends.
Befriend yourself while on the Camino.
That's for certain.
But I did continue to walk, and finally I came across the next town, which wasn't the next town that I had planned on going to. The one that I had been planning on going to was like 6 kilometers away. I ended up walking like 15 kilometers to the next town. The town was called Religios.
So that's like another like 3 hours.
That was like 3.5 hours, perhaps. Yeah.
Wow.
And I got there. I got to the albergue. They were just about to take. They had like 3 beds left. So. Like, luckily they had a bed, and he just very colloquially, he conversationally asked me, like, "Oh, where'd you come from?" All in Spanish, but I told him where I had come from, a town called Calzadilla de la Cueza, and I told him where I had come from, and he just stops and he looks at me, and then he just gets up and leaves. And then he walks out the front door. He comes back in with about like 4 middle-aged Spanish women who are hanging out outside, and he just says something to them quickly in Spanish. And then this woman comes up to me holding a rosary and asks me in Spanish, "Oh my goodness, how are your feet?" I'm like, I'm still standing.
God. Oh my God.
Because it's no one walks that far.
You had to have felt like just straight gelatin.
I could barely walk the next day, but I actually walked 7 more hours to get to Lyon, because I didn't Lyon. Then I took a day. I took a day of rest in Lyon.
Yeah, good.
But that was one of the aspects of my experience that I gained a lot from that experience, from being lost. But I mean, that there are parts in the way that the yellow arrows just aren't in the best spots, or in the most obvious spots, or maybe they're weathered.
They're like
or
tricksters.
Most people have, I was talking to a guy in the hostel, and he said that what I had done, I had accidentally taken a division from the Camino Frances that I was on, and I had accidentally gone onto the Camino Roma, which is the Roman way. And I had actually just diverted at some point on my path to a separate parallel path that didn't stop at the same towns. So that was a wild experience. But I want to get into the Camino and my experiences with that on other podcasts.
I know
that I have with other people.
Because it's I ask these questions because, you know, you've told me your stories about the Camino, and they fascinate me, and they blow my mind what you had gone through, and I feel like I incorporated one of the kind of directional signs that you see in the Camino, the blue sign with the yellow arrow and the scalp shell. And that's kind of a pillar in the graphic that I made for you, that the honeycomb pathway that you were talking about a little before, that has the wisdom traditions within each sort of hexagon. I have the Camino sign kind of pointing the way to the horizon, and then there's along that pathway in the image is the tree that you were talking about with the little mushroom dude cave drawing, and that's one of my favorite parts of the whole graphic, to be honest, because I know how much the Camino meant to you and how much it means to so many people who have also embarked on that journey. I'm sure I don't really know that many people who have also done it, but I feel like it's kind of a really cool representation of, just following the arrows that best serve your path. And sometimes they'll take you down these Donnie Darko sort of offsets of what you think your timeline is supposed to be, and you learn a lot about yourself. And I feel like, as far as this Lifting the Iceberg podcast goes, and as far as the graphic goes, I feel like incorporating that story is such a powerful statement of who you are as like a determined, persevering individual. And so I hope you talk about your stories more with the podcast, because I think that they really are a strong defining point of who you are as an individual, and your ability to trust yourself and to continue to scream out the questions that you're looking for, even if nobody's hearing you, know? And so anyways, we can keep going.
Yeah.
But
I
just think
the Camino is a big
story.
part, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm in the process still right now of writing a book about my experiences. Kind of writing this autobiographical / fictional memoir where I kind of like weave in a story into the actual experiences. And in this process, I really want to explore what the Camino meant for other people. And I plan on having other pilgrims on the podcast for them to talk about how this experience affected their lives, because I do think that the pilgrimage is one of the fundamental religious modalities, the modalities of mystical experience. And everyone has their own experience of these things, and they all take from it this incredibly personal message that they, in multiple ways, try to bring into being. And now I want to talk about why I'm really interested in interviewing visionary artists on this podcast.
Why are you interested in interviewing visionary artists?
I'm glad you asked. So just on the subject of people having primary religious experiences and bringing back something from it, visionary artists are the ones who intentionally become masters at bringing something back from these experiences had in altered states, so the rest of us can glean some meaning from it. There's a quote by Albert Hoffman, the inventor or the person who first synthesized LSD.
The good doctor.
Where he says, psychedelics will be to psychology what the microscope is to biology.
Say that again.
The psychedelics will be to psychology what the microscope is to biology. And the psychedelic experience, but also referring to the Camino, just the mystical experience had through other modalities as well, not just the psychedelic experience, but the psychedelic experience is the best, like, chunkiest example. The psychedelic experience can be a microscope for inner space. And pieces of visionary art are like slides taken out from underneath the microscope in a way that everyone can see. And qualitatively analyzing pieces of visionary art is the best way to learn about the mystical experience, because it wouldn't be sustainable for me to take acid every time I wanted to study the experience. That's like continually looking through the microscope without ever taking a step back to study your notes or reviewing other scientists' findings. Analyzing visionary art is the best and the most sustainable way to study the nature and source of mystical experience. So that will be one of the primary themes of this podcast, talking to artists about their message, helping them articulate what it is they were trying to say. I often talk to artists about their art, and they don't even really know what they're trying to say. It's almost like they're just bringing something else into being.
Totally.
They're just like the cup, the holder that like got dipped into this soup.
Right.
And they just splashed it onto a canvas, and now we can stand next to each other and look at it together and go, what is that?
Right. Well, I think for a lot of artists, there's two ways of viewing art, and it's, are you making art for the final product? Do you have this strong vision that you want to materialize and make into a final hurrah, or is art to you more about the process? I learn about this a lot in art therapy classes that I've taken, and a lot of it is about, and you see this a lot with a lot of abstraction and more free flowing, Karen Charles likes to say flowadelic sort of works of art, is that it's more about the experience that the artist is having while it's happening, and not necessarily being attached to what that result is, more or less kind of purging their current experience onto something like a canvas.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about, because I've talked to Alex Gray about this, and he says that most of the time he has a vision in mind before he starts painting.
Definitely.
and kind of has that in his imagination as a stencil that he then brings into being. And I've tried to paint. I've tried to paint some of my psychedelic experiences where it really was that I have a memory of this experience that I'm doing my best to bring into a crystallized form through the use of painting. And that is one path that a lot of visionary artists take. But I also see other artists who do what I call active visionary art, where they don't have something. Hilary Astrid is a good example of this, where she doesn't necessarily know where she's going when she starts a piece, but she is in this active visionary process while she's creating.
She's painting with strokes of intention, like
strokes of intention, but it's not clear how far down the road that she can see into her creative process.
But intention being like Randall Roberts and Morgan Mandala, they teach a class at the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, which is a nonprofit church organization that promotes creativity as a spiritual practice. COSM, Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, founded by the Grays, Alex Gray and Allison Gray. But Randall and Morgan, they teach an art as prayer workshop, and their whole thing is very much the abstract experience, and not necessarily well, in some ways it's meditating on a vision and trying to bring it to life, but in other ways it's they say they create art to be present is really their thing. So it's not necessarily even having a vision, but they're just painting with the intention to be present. Yeah. And again, it's like going back to that idea of art being more about the process than the result.
Yeah. Well, this is something I really want to talk about on this podcast too, is what is visionary art? Because visionary art, it's a lot like parkour, People know what parkour is.
What is it?
But each individual parkour athlete seems to have a different definition of what parkour is.
What is parkour to you? What is it?
Parkour for me is the art of flowing over obstacles, both physical and mental. I think that parkour is an embodied spiritual practice for me and a way of developing my mind, body, and spirit.
Do you do flips and stuff?
I do
around?
flips, but a lot of people think that flips aren't parkour. That as soon as you do a flip, you're no longer doing parkour. Now you're doing free running, and that there's this.
Says who?
Well, exactly. It says, depends if you ask David
Says
Bell
the
or
man.
Sebastian Foucault, the two creators.
Did the man say that?
Well, see, there is no man. And in parkour, I really want to spread the message that you are your own man. I want parkour to be what it is for each person who practices it. But I think that there are certain like fundamental things that string through all the individual definitions of parkour in the same way that there is a certain unitive thread through all the definitions of visionary art. And that's something I want to explore in this podcast. When I have visionary artists on, I want to ask them at some point during the interview, what is your definition of visionary art?
That's a loaded question. I look forward to hearing what those answers are.
It's definitely an open-ended question, and I want to.
Worth exploring.
It's worth exploring. I want to hear artists grapple with that question.
Yeah.
Not that definitions matter, but that it tells me about the artist.
Totally.
Their answer tells me about the artist.
Sure.
So let's move on. We've been talking
going.
about cave art and the religious symbols and the Camino de Santiago symbol.
What other elements do you want to talk about that stand out?
I want to talk about the significance of the Merkabah, because it does the Merkabah because it somewhat relates to what we were just talking about. The Merkabah, if those of you who don't know, it's the star-like geometric figure to the top and bottom sides of the moon in the Lifting the Iceberg graphic on the bottom right side next to the iceberg. So the significance of this image for me came from my first ayahuasca experience in Peru, where ayahuasca shamanism is perfectly legal, as it is recognized as an important medicine tradition. It was my first ceremony, and I had just drank the brew from my shaman, Don Jose. I didn't feel any perceptual changes in my consciousness, but I began to become very introspective about my personal life, and I was thinking about different problems that I was having with my family and myself at the time, and these issues that I call terrestrial problems that matter down here on Earth, and
we all have those.
After I had some cycles of introspection about these problems, I felt the urge to purge. I felt like I was the urge to purge. I felt like I was gonna puke. So, ayahuasca dependably makes you puke. So I grabbed my bucket and I purged violently into this bucket. And when I was done, I felt the effects of the ayahuasca really coming on. Most people experience that. The ayahuasca doesn't really hit you after the first purge. And I looked up. I pulled my head out of this bucket and I looked up, and I had my first visual hallucination of this bright, radiant, star-like figure. I thought it was like a compass star. It was just so fascinating. And I looked at it and I was like a deer in headlights. I was like looking into it entranced me. It mesmerized me. And after a moment of looking into this weird geometric star, I began to feel the presence of snakes. The star began to fade away, and I started to see the thick, smooth, scaly bodies of anacondas slither around my vision. And then all of a sudden, I saw this mangy, dirty rat come at me and crawl into my throat. It didn't feel like my physical throat, but almost like the throat to my ethereal body, like my spirit body, It's very hard to describe some of these things, but I could feel its claws scratching their way down into me, and I started to panic, and I just became consumed by this hatred for this gross, dirty rat that was burrowing into me. Then an anaconda started to crawl down my throat after the rat. So I'm having these animals running down my spirit body.
Just making themselves at home.
Just making themselves at home. But then I was like consumed by this sense of love and gratitude that this hero snake had just come to rescue me from this rat that was crawling into my being. And when the snake had grabbed the rat with its mouth, they both like separated themselves from my body and then twisted around in front of me to form the symbol of the Ouroboros, which is the snake eating its tail. And
wow.
Then I realized that I had hatred for the rat for burrowing into me, and I had praised the snake for hunting and eating the rat. But this was wrong of me. I was attributing value judgments to the behavior of the rat and the snake, when in reality, it is the nature of the rat to burrow into small spaces, and it is the nature of the snake to eat the rat. And the rat needed the snake to hunt it as much as the snake needed to eat it. And when I saw this balance between the snake and the rat, outside of my human value judgments, I was launched into a completely new, higher dimension of my experience. It's like that realization was the key that led me into what followed. What followed, I'll get into in another podcast, because that's not really important right now.
The suspense is killing me.
But back to the Merkabah, when I had gone home after this experience, I was telling my friend Raphael what I had experienced, and I was telling him about the strange geometric star that I had seen before I had this experience with the snake and the rat. And he said, "Oh yeah, you saw a Merkabah." I'm like, "What?"
You didn't know what?
And he said, "A Merkabah. Apparently, beholding the Merkabah is the way in which you transport yourself to higher states of consciousness." And like my eyes got wide, and then I asked him to pull a picture up on Google, and then he pulled a picture up of a Merkabah, and god damn it, that was exactly what I saw. I had no prior knowledge of what a Merkabah was. I had no idea what the mythology surrounding that figure was at all. And yet I experienced it, and in such a way that was congruent with the mythology surrounding this figure. And that blew my mind, because I asked myself, again, this question: where did the Merkabah come from? Was that present in my own imagination? Is that a figure of the human unconscious that just presented itself to me? Or did that come from another dimension, that I was plugged into while on ayahuasca? That's beautiful. Something I've heard Graham Hancock talk about, that when you're on these substances, we interact with other dimensions that we don't normally, we can't normally be attuned to. So that's the mystery that the Merkabah represents for me. Where did that Merkabah come from?
It's almost like a kind of what activates your question, really. Because you are definitely like a science-based individual, but that's something that like you're having trouble to fully explain.
I'm having trouble reconciling that experience.
How beautiful
because
is
I
that?
knew it's like what Terence McKenna used to say about the psychedelic experience.
Which was what? He's
like, so you have a chest of drawers in your bedroom, and you're looking through your drawers. You know perfectly well which clothes are yours. You're looking through your clothes,
got
and
some
then
trousers,
some trousers, some socks, all things you've worn before. And then you pull out this like bright hot pink thong, and then you're holding this up. It came from your dresser, but you're like, this is definitely not mine. And sometimes you have that experience on a psychedelic where you're presented with something, and you have this experience of saying, this definitely did not come from me. And I don't think that Merkabah came from me. But at
Right.
the same time, this is why I'm interested in lifting the iceberg, because I don't know how deep me goes.
Right.
That Merkabah could be in the depths of my imagination, in the collective unconscious that is just swimming under surface level, you know?
Those deep cave waters.
Those deep
You little
cave
Scorpio.
waters, jumping into the deep cave waters. So that's the significance of the Merkabah.
Beautiful story.
And I also, this is why I asked you to put in the image of the snake and the rat, because it was this dynamic between the snake and the rat that held the key to understanding nature in my ayahuasca experience. And the snake in this piece emerges from a DNA strand that is coming out of another main element of this piece, the rose.
The rose.
The rose. And the rose carries a lot of symbolism.
Why is that?
Well, both in general as well as specific to us. The rose is most commonly known as a symbol for love and romance and passion, not only because it is red, which is a color associated with romance, passion, intimacy, but because the flower is the sexual organ of the plant world, you know? But then we can also trace back the presence of the rose and the heart in this piece to a night that you and I had together just a little over a year ago. It was on January 15th, 2018, and you and I had met up at our friend Paz's house to celebrate Pongal, which is a Hindu celebration of abundance. And we had known each other for 2 years prior to that, but that was the first time we had really hung out outside of the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors.
A place where we both volunteered.
A place where we both volunteered,
and
and we had
there.
met when we both met. We had seen each other when we both met up there once a month, but this is the first time we had seen each other like outside that space. And we met up there to...
At Paz's.
At Paz's to A, hang out, but B, talk about the graphic that I had commissioned you to make me.
Yeah.
And during the beginning of the night, Paz had given us a bunch of roses and had asked us to pluck the petals off and decorate the altar with them. And she had left the room, and it was only us next to the altar. And I had picked up one of the roses to give to you. And in that exchange, when I handed you that rose,
we paused for a moment.
And we looked into each other's eyes. And it was in that exchange that it was the first time we really saw that sparkle in each other's eye. And we had that moment of, looking into each other's eyes when I was giving you the rose, but then we just kind of shook it off and kept decorating the altar. But throughout the rest of that night, like, there was a very clear, palpable tension between us, which is not something we were able to really act on that night. But it influenced one of the first drawings of the graphic you had made after that night. You sent me a picture of what you had drawn, and it had a big rose growing out of the eyeball and a big old dripping heart right next to it. And it seemed that you were channeling some of your feelings from that night into your art. Did you have that experience?
Well, it's hard to really define. I think that ultimately I've always found you to be an incredibly inspiring and intelligent individual. And I think through our friendship, volunteering at COSM and hanging out on trees and climbing on trees and really getting to know each other, there's that natural sort of boiling of what this image could be. And initially with the graphic, it was just trying to find movement and drawing squiggles and lines and really trying to figure out the direction in which I wanted things to go, and creating basic shapes like the honeycomb and maybe a heart to throw in there. But yeah, I would definitely say that there was, I don't know if it was something or just myself kind of saying, add that, make the heart, it's one thing to add a heart shape. That's such a simple icon in any piece of artwork, but to have the heart dripping and have the heart kind of with
on flames, right?
In flames, you know, what was that indicating? I'm not really sure, but what I know for certain is that I really conquered a lot in that first sketch, and I felt really good about it. I mean, I was so excited that I texted you and was like, look, because the whole reason why we met up at Paz's in the first place was because I made a sort of preliminary graphic where it was a little more computer based.
That had no prior drawing.
You weren't really into it at all. You were like, hey, this is like, no. I'm like, we need to meet up. We need to talk about this. I'm like, all right, great. Let's hang out at Paz's. And I was definitely feeling inspired after we had hung out there. And I mean, Paz and Ty are such amazing people too. And I felt really activated from singing kirtan and eating with my hands, you know, the meal that Paz made that was so delicious. And so I was already feeling the buzz just from that environment. And because I was, you know, with projects for you, so I was immersed in thinking about you. Yeah, for sure. The rose and the heart came out quite effortlessly. And they were one of the, other than the sort of sacred geometry flower of life pattern that I have kind of creeping up behind the back of the iceberg, you know, the head and the iceberg were the first elements, and then it was kind of the sacred geo, then some line work trying to give myself an idea of the overall direction in which I wanted these elements to go. You got to start off with like a really rough blueprint, but the heart and the rose really came almost immediately. And I didn't really look at it at first as if that defined our relationship. I think that I was still in this denial state where it was like, ooh, I felt like this cool thing with like one of my best friends, but you know, I gotta stay pro, and I gotta like work on this graphic for him and like make it the best that I can and like honor him the best that I can and honor his vision the best that I can. And so naturally, like, the motif of a flower, the motif of a rose came out pretty quickly. But then also, yeah, I think that there was this hidden motive there. But I don't think that I realized it. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm adding a rose because he gave me that rose. It wasn't until really like after, you know, we kind of evolved our relationship that I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like how you feel kind of about the Merkabah story that you were explaining. I feel a lot of resonance with this graphic and how it's a staple to not only your intentions for lifting the iceberg in this podcast, but kind of it's an image we've created together, and it forced you helped set me up in a way where I could really tap into my creative drives, and you gave me a framework of what you were looking for, and because I love you so much, I wanted to make it the best that it could be. And then before I knew it, it defined so much about us and so much about the world. And it's one of my most favorite pieces I've ever made in my artistic life. So who knows? I just went on a tangent there.
Yeah, no, I'm so fascinated by how certain things just bubble up into the creative imagination from the subconscious. And I feel like it's really amazing how art has that ability to externalize a feeling into an image where you then look at it and go, oh, that must be why I put that there.
It's like people who are writers and they write one sentence that they look at later and they realize why they wrote it then. I think it's the same thing for any creative, any artist, any musician. It's like you're meant to continue to create every day. Don't stop creating ever. You know what I mean? And my friend Jonas once said, please keep creating. Focus on your creativity. That's the only thing, that's your first love, is your creativity. And all the other boundless loves that are supposed to come in your life will through your acts of creativity. And don't settle for less.
Well, creativity, being creative and upholding your creativity is the best way to have a relationship with yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And how are you going to have a relationship with anyone else unless you're in a deep, intimate relationship with,
With
your
your
own
expression.
with your own expression, with your own
Yeah.
creative process. That's almost the only way you can really deeply explore
It's a
who you
no-brainer.
are.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring that up, and I think it's fascinating how certain images come up through creative expression, like contents of the mind expose themselves and externalize themselves through making art.
And your levels of openness, I think that had I not been so open with kind of absorbing you, and I mean that from like first off, I meant that in like a professional sense. Like I really needed to open up myself to who you are to even be able to begin to create this piece.
To channel, I guess, me.
And then I just fell in love with you. I mean, it was just like, it was inevitable. No apologies at all. I'm so grateful. But, I definitely, you asked me to do this piece for you, and I felt like, wow, I felt so aligned with that request. And I've been exploring the exploding head motif a little bit here and there for the last like 5 to 7 years, whether it was in high school or in college. One of my first like what you could call visionary images was this piece, this drawing I did where, I had the seed of life inside the profile of this head, and then there's the flower of life exploding out of it. And it was inspired by the mind, once stretched by a new idea, never returns to its original dimensions. And I always just love this exploding head motif because it's boundless. There are no dimensions, And so when you asked me to do this, it was like, oh, hell yeah, I'm so down. I'm already spinning with ideas. You gave me so many amazing references and so many different elements that you wanted into it. And then I also had the opportunity to really dive deeper into who you are. And how could I not like feel so just in love with that? Like all your stories, just your insights on the way you view life. I just wanted it to be perfect. And like, it was just an added bonus that,
well, I'm kind of all over the place. I'm a lot of things.
Oh,
so
yeah,
what was your process like in bringing all of these different design elements together?
Well, I would say, I kind of mentioned before, there was you got to find a grounding point, I think. And for me, it was obvious. It was the profile of a head, and then the iceberg submerged into the brain area. And once I had that, you can kind of consider it a horizon line. You have a surface that you can expand from. And so it really started out with me kind of, going from the right edge of the skull to the left edge of the skull, and kind of making these diagonal gestural strokes of where did I want a hypothetical barrier line. I liked the idea of the iceberg and the head being the farthest point down, and then from there, everything kind of expanding out from it. So I created these just gestural cloud-like squiggles, if you will, kind of, radially pointing out from the iceberg. And I knew you wanted sacred geometry. I knew you wanted a yin yang. I knew you wanted a tree. I knew you wanted like the UFO sort of scene. And so it honestly just sort of unfolded. I really wanted to kind of collage elements around the iceberg first. Again, it's like when you're drawing for artists who have drawn kind of a portrait of the face. I've always was told, go, or even, with people who do mandala work, you kind of start with the middle and then you build out from there, and so I started with the focal point, which was the iceberg, and I slowly sort of played a little Tetris game with myself where I was adding these different elements on top. So, where I was starting to kind of build this flower of life pattern from behind the skull, I realized I could kind of turn that into a cloud formation that something could sit on. So that turned into the yin yang, which then had there's a New York City skyline that kind of sits on this cloud-like representation of what is the flower of life. But, and that turns into a microchip. And I had the heart there because that's another like shape that was easy to just embed in there, which I came to understand later had kind of a deeper meaning between you and I. And I love the motif of a staircase. And so I knew that could be
that's something you
element.
really wanted to add, because that's one of your major artistic motifs in your work.
Escher, man, he has just really changed the game with perspective, and he incorporates the staircase a lot in a lot of his pieces, and there's something about it that really attracts me. And I think the idea of traveling up the staircase of life, a spiral staircase of life, where you're going in this rotation, so you're revisiting perhaps certain challenges and adversities that you're going through, but because you're a little bit higher up on the staircase, you have a little bit more wisdom on how to accomplish and get through it, and then you just keep going. So I added this sort of staircase loop-de-loop. It's like a dual staircase loop-de-loop. That's how I'll describe it. And the loop, I just added these little gestural line elements in the loop, and before I knew it, it was an ayahuasca vine. And I've never done ayahuasca before, but you have. But you didn't ask me to add ayahuasca, but it somehow appeared. So there's that sort of intuitive
But you know what?
shape building.
I think you forgot that. I think you may have retrieved something from the original drawing that I gave you, because in that original drawing that I made, I had created an ayahuasca vine.
You did. Okay.
So maybe that content was in your mind, and just kind of, you knew in your process of trying to channel me, you kind of pulled on that and reproduced it through your own filter. Right. Through your own artistic lens.
Yeah. And so, all these things just sort of came naturally, and there's some pieces there. My work generally will incorporate sort of I'm a Leo, so I love the sun, and I think the sun is an obvious representation of life and abundance. It gives and gives and gives and never asks for anything in return. You know what I mean? It's just like, hi, I'm the sun, and I'm here, and I'll be here for another couple billion years, so have fun. So I incorporated that in there, and that helped create another horizon line where I was able to then connect, the hexagonal sort of honeycomb pathway, which then created a land for the tree to grow out of. And so it, much like how our conversation is just connecting from one thing to the next, I would say that's kind of how the drawing evolved. And I did 3 or 4 different drawings before I scanned it and colorized it on Photoshop. So
all of which will be on Instagram. Check out a post
check the whole
evolution.
Yeah. So and you wanted some mushrooms in there, which was like a no-brainer. I'll just add some mushies in there, and through the rose kind of coming out of the eye, and the stem comes all the way down. You have a green stem, which is green, also is associated with the heart. It's the heart chakra color. And then that kind of the stem comes through the middle of the rose, and it turns into a DNA strand, which was something that you wanted. And the DNA strand loops behind the ayahuasca vine and turns into that snake, and the snake is kind of resting on the stairs, and then you have the mouse or the rat kind of scurrying up the stairs and becoming face to face with this rat, and they're kind of just having this stare down, and
with the snake.
All the while there's a little image of you perhaps doing a handstand on top of that ayahuasca vine, just conquering the world with this beautifully inverted lens that you're looking through. So it's been the most amazing brain exercise I could have ever asked for. And you know, sometimes artists feel like, oh, they don't want to have, you know, somebody tell them what they want in something. You know, you got a lot of anarchists out there that are like, I'm going to create what I want to create, which is amazing. And there's so much validity to that for sure. But what I loved with you helping me as a director, you really were the director of this project. You gave me elements that I could work with and then said, go for it. You know, so I had this multi-level of inspiration, multiple levels of inspiration. And then you let me kind of piece it all together while still kind of being true to myself as an artist. And like, as the image continued, our relationship became, we just continue to bond, and we stayed truthful the whole time, and also had moments where I already would do something like make the background a specific color, make the grassy knoll area a specific purple color, and then you'd come hang out with me that night and say, hey, I was thinking maybe you should make that grassy knoll area purple. And I'm like, no problem, I already did it. Like, come look.
Yeah,
you know?
We started to be just on the same wavelength with how we wanted to.
Right. Or I'd have the snake come around, you know, chilling on the steps, and I'd be talking with one of my best friends, Louis at Itzo, who's an amazing artist, and I would tell him this idea of, hey, I was thinking, you know, I have this snake here, and I kind of want to have the rat like kind of scurrying up, facing it, like on the steps. What do you think of that? And he's like, oh, that's a great idea. You should totally do it, totally being supportive. And then I get a text from you being like, hey, I was thinking of maybe, you know, you could have the rat on the steps, and you could be having a stare down with like almost verbatim.
Yeah,
You know, which is another really interesting thing about like our interconnectedness as a species, is being able to come up with the same ideas, you know, and being really open to that, I think, to each other, and being truthful with our creative process. We were able to come to these conclusions together before we even communicated about it. So that was really,
well, we were
really
facing
fun.
the same creative problems in the same kind of way with the same intentions, you know, and I think that really synced us up.
Totally. And just like falling in love with you really probably helped. So just saying. But we've come a long way. I mean, it took me about, you know, 9 months to put it all together. Yeah. And it's currently has become a painting too.
That'll be on the post too.
Okay,
you can check that out on Instagram.
And that's a little different from
well, that was this piece without any of my creative direction. Yeah. You know, that painting is you taking what I wanted and exploring other variables. Yeah. You know?
Well, this image is sort of like a die cut image, meaning, you know, there's while it's on a, you know, 1:1 aspect ratio, it doesn't look like it's taking up the whole surface area of a square. You know what I mean? It's kind of contained. And with the painting, I have all of this excess space with the full dimensions of the canvas. I was able to kind of, you know, bleed beyond what we had already established in the graphic. And so both are really unique.
Yeah. Well, let's look at some more elements in this piece.
Yeah.
So another element in this piece I want to talk about is the Rubik's Cube. The Rubik's Cube situated between the rose and the heart. I wanted to put that in there because the Rubik's Cube is such a powerful cultural symbol of learning and problem solving, which is something I studied a lot when I was in college. At Temple, I worked as a researcher for the Cognition and Learning Laboratory, and I was working on a study that looked at the different ways that kids think about spatial representations of fractions. And I spent a year in and out of different elementary schools all over Philadelphia running experiments with kids. And it was during this time working as a researcher that I thought a lot about the education system. And that's something I really want to explore with this podcast. What type of education works how people learn, what it means to be educated, and what are the potential innate differences in the ways that people learn, you know? So the Rubik's Cube is such a powerful symbol of
so
that
amazing.
for me.
Ooh, you can hear the fire.
Oh, we can. We just put a log on the fire. Now
we've been enjoying a fire this whole
Yeah.
time, and so I hope
we're
through
nice and cozy.
hearing the sizzle, you can feel our warmth. It's freezing
Yeah,
up here tonight.
I think it's like 3 degrees outside, maybe, but we're nice.
It's like 5.
No, okay, yeah. Sorry.
So it's kind of warm.
Kind of. Yeah. Well, we're cozy in here.
Well, that's, when it's cold out, you got to problem solve like a Rubik's Cube.
Like
so
a Rubik's
you
Cube.
make a little fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Contained fire and warm your tootsies.
So another thing that you talked about before, you mentioned before, was the little guy doing the handstand on top of the ayahuasca vine. And that was something that we kind of threw in at the final aspect of this piece because I really wanted just another, something that clearly represented my path with parkour. And you said it brilliantly, like that being symbolic of the inverted perspective that it can give you.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's why I love doing inversions, you know, and yoga is like, if you're in a handstand, you are forced to be present. Forced. You cannot think about anything else but the fact that you're upside down, holding your weight with your arms and
Same
your hands.
thing if you're balancing on a railing. You know,
Right.
you can only think about that. That's, I want to really explore with this podcast the ways in which parkour can be a spiritual path and a mindfulness practice, because parkour is such a huge part of who I am, and it really is one of my life's passions. And it is a spiritual path for me. I'm really interested in getting other parkour athletes on here to talk about the mental and spiritual aspects of parkour, because I feel like there just isn't enough of a dialogue about parkour as a spiritual practice. We're being flooded with yoga this and yoga that, and yoga is great and everything, but parkour does for me what yoga does for people who do that.
Well, and American yoga is so much different
than actual
yoga.
yogic traditions.
Yeah.
I mean, modern yoga is actually contemporary yoga is actually based off of Swedish aerobics.
Right.
But there are obvious benefits, mental and spiritual benefits through that you can tap into through movement.
Right.
And a lot of that is focused. A lot of studies and philosophies on that is using yoga as a lens to view the connection between physical movement and mental and spiritual health. But I want to look at parkour, and I want to talk to parkour athletes about what parkour does for them and what their path with parkour is, and what it means to them, what it has done for them.
How it activates their inspired action in the world.
And what their definition of parkour is.
Yeah, parkour. How do they pronounce it?
Le parkour. Le parkour. Parkour, if you're American.
Parker. I like to do parkour.
I like parkour.
I like to do handstands and flips off of buildings, and I call it parkour.
It's more deep than that. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was important for me to have that handstand in there because parkour is something that I'm going to integrate into what I talk about on this podcast. And next to the guy doing a handstand, we haven't talked about that yet, there's a flock of seagulls, which is an allusion to one of my favorite books, Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Our boy.
Yeah, our boy John. Yeah. I highly recommend that book to anyone who's listening to this, as it really is like one of the most important spiritual texts of the 1960s counterculture.
And it's so short.
It's so short. You can read it in 3 hours,
Yeah.
And you really look at the process of spiritual evolution through the fable of a seagull
just wanting to fly
and wanting to break away from society's order and kind of society's tyrannical elements to discover what could be.
transcend into this higher realm of intelligent seagulls who just want to fly.
Spoiler alert.
Could be a spoiler alert.
Read it anyway.
It's really amazing.
Yeah. So I wanted to throw that in there, and that those seagulls fit really well in that space.
They help with the negative space on a sort of more technical.
Then we have the aliens.
Gotta
which
have the ETs.
I have interest in both their literal and symbolic form. Someone who I just had a conversation with this weekend is Alan Steinfeld, and he's an expert on the literal manifestations of UFOs, being extraterrestrials that are visiting our planet and with government cover-ups and the possibilities of Men in Black, reverse engineering alien technology to give us microwaves and sunglasses. And I'm interested in those stories because I think there's some compelling stories.
Sure.
I'm not convinced of anything yet. I don't know. For me, it's a mystery, and I'm leaving it as a mystery for now.
But it can be worth exploring.
A mystery that's worth exploring.
Worth
exactly.
lifting the iceberg on.
But I'm also interested in the alien as an archetypal symbol of the other, but also a symbol of what the end point of evolution for humanity could be. Maybe not the end point, but what are
an ultimate
what
point.
are humans going to look like in 3 million years?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're just maybe a decade or two away from sending the first person to Mars. Elon Musk wants to send a rocket to Mars every 5 years after 2022, I think it is. So we are becoming the aliens.
Right.
You know, we are inevitably going to become the aliens.
Right. Well, it's kind of like Neil deGrasse Tyson says, like how we view apes is how like our evolved selves will view us. You know, like there's that like 1 degree of separation between us and apes, and how we like see Coco as able to do sign language is like, you know, basic level intelligence is what we're doing now is kind of like how our evolved selves will view us as like this chimp that can
we
do sign
separated
language.
from chimpanzees about 6.7 million years ago.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about where we would be 6.7 million years down the line.
Right.
Also, aliens for me are a symbol of what life could evolve into, the possibilities of evolution, because I often think, I was talking to Allison about this.
Allison
Gray. We were talking about how the universe is 13.9 billion years old. The Earth is 4 billion years old. The extinction that killed the dinosaurs was 65 million years ago, and that was pretty much a reset point, and humans came out of that from like the small rats and small rodents, small mammals during that age 65 million years ago. Now we are here. That took 65 million years, but the Earth is 13.9 billion years old. So there could have been...
the universe or the Earth?
The universe is 13.9 billion years old. The Earth is around 4 billion years old. So what if there was a habitable planet in the Goldilocks zone that was generated 2 billion years into the creation of the universe? Then that Earth could have like 8 billion years of evolution on us, you know? So what could humans plus 8 billion years be?
I know. Hopefully a lot more loving.
Hopefully a lot more loving, maybe some cool toys, you know? I mean, we got cool toys now, but maybe
an extra arm.
Extra arm, you know, take a
extra
hyperloop into the next dimension, maybe.
Maybe.
Well, I think that's just, the alien for me is a symbol of what could be.
I love that. I've never really heard somebody describe it like that.
Yeah, it's not just a kooky conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people push it off, but I'm really interested in the symbolic elements of the extraterrestrial, because that is seen in so many different cultures.
Right.
And I'm also interested in, I think crop circles are fascinating.
Yeah.
and that's a mystery I like to explore.
Right.
So I wanted that element in there.
Of
I wanted
course,
the aliens
gotta
flying
add it.
around. Also, they just look cool.
Yeah,
Little dude in the
flying
big
saucer,
and
like the Jetsons.
they're beaming down into the microchip. The rays from the UFO is connected to the microchip, which is then connected to the city.
Yep.
So it's like this idea of kind of technology being extruded from this potential we have that then becomes integrated into the present structure of society. And I think that that's a really interesting motif. The original motif in the drawing that I made was a circuit board connecting to neurons. Then the neurons were then connected to a television that had a smiley face on it. So it's like
I
this.
didn't do that at all, did I?
No, that's okay. I like the city and the microchip.
Well, I put the neurons in the heart.
And the neurons are
anyways.
in the heart. So I wanted some kind of element of the nervous system in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that was kind of the idea of life and technology kind of becoming one, and the possibilities that result from that. So I'm glad you added that element in there. And also, I really like this city and the microchip next to each other, because I think it's really fascinating to look at things in a fractal way, meaning the same patterns existing on multiple levels. And, you know, since moving to New York City, I really do see the metaphor of the city is a microchip.
Totally.
The city is a motherboard. I feel like a unit of information moving through a computer when I'm on my commute to work in the morning, you know, and
It's like data.
I'm just data moving through this computer, you know, and this computer is just like self-correcting itself in the direction of exponential evolution. And it's an amazing thing to be a part of. I love living in the city, but I also, you know, it's
might feel like a sardine.
Might feel like a sardine just packed into the subway.
You win some, you lose some.
It's I like being part of the information that New York City is for now. And I do love this perspective of analyzing these patterns that exist at multiple levels. So I think that's a great motif in there to express that. Yeah, man, we really hit everything. I feel like.
I think so too.
Is there anything else you want to talk about? What other kind of creative challenges did this piece pose for you? Maybe in terms of the coloration,
well, colors, yes, but I think also moments where you might have had a distinct idea of how something should look, and moments where I had a distinctive idea of how things should look, and those two ideas being different from one another, and the challenge / opportunity of us kind of working that out and being like, you know, me knowing when to kind of follow your flow, and then also knowing when to be like, I'm making an executive call about this design element that I need to do. So I generally caved because I really trust your artistic vision. Like you would say, I would say something. I would say something and you would just like say or something else, and you would give like an infinite amount of reasoning, and I'd be like, okay, but do it. But sometimes it was just me being like, I love you, but like what? Like what? Can you remember anything? For example, like the border. Oh, yeah, we were talking about, and we'll have those two pieces up on the post too, whether or not to have a white background or like a darker, solid background to the piece. Well, the sticker that we have, which I'm sure is available for you guys to have as well, either online or... That'll be on alexaspaddy.com. On alexaspaddy.com, on my Etsy shop. But the sticker itself kind of gets die-cutted in a way where there's a natural sort of white border. But within the image, I had to make this executive call about kind of having the image be held by a strong sort of background shape.
Yeah.
Which ultimately
it's
was
like coagulates it all together.
There you are with that word again. It's like the fifth
Oh, that was
time
coagulate. Colloquially.
Oh, those are two different words.
Colloquially
there
coagulated
I am with my English. I'm just so diverse in words. But, you know, I needed to have a shape that kind of, you know, fit the perimeter of the entire image. But I felt really strongly about having it be grounded in that. I think also, I can't really remember. We didn't really have many moments where we were like...
We didn't. That's why I asked why, because we really didn't have many.
We really were seamless in our collaboration, and it was really awesome to have that sort of working relationship. I mean, you are very particular, I will say that, and it was a challenge for me to make sure I was doing my best work for you. And so I definitely felt challenged by that. And you know, we're both perfectionists, so I think it took a little longer than we had anticipated it to be completed with our busy lives that we have already. Yeah. But I think, you know, it's finally here, and I'm feeling confident about its release. And I think that as a digital artist, you know, I studied printmaking, and I've painted for a while, and I've explored so many different avenues that art has to offer, but I've been really exploring the digital world and graphic design, mainly through my work that I do with the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. I do a lot of the graphic design for our events and things of that sort. But this was the first project that I really got to kind of create from scratch, as in I was working with my own abilities as an artist and creating my own sort of rendering of what Lifting the Iceberg could be. And so I think that it was a challenge in that I was creating something from scratch, and I was creating something that was inspired by a different brain, aka your brain. So I was trying, you know, but going back to your thing of you know, is there a source coming through the individual that makes the art, or is it a you know, all made up in the brain, right? Is it just a result of things firing off in your brain? And I think for me it was like a combination of allowing you to channel through me, so there was that external source influencing me, and then also my own sort of technique,
and talent
being sort of infiltrated into this piece. And so that was really fascinating. I really felt like I was doing like a neural handshake with you, you know, and initiating that to really kind of make something beautiful for you and for us and for me as an artist. And I'm really grateful. I feel like this piece really is helping to kickstart my own aspirations as a digital artist and a graphic designer, and exploring that new frontier of art. You know, it's so new in, you know, relation to the traditional mediums of oil paint and even paper making, you know, papyrus. These things have existed for years and years and years and years and years. And here comes graphic design out of nowhere. And I feel like that this is a medium that's worth exploring for me. And I'm really grateful that you kind of helped kickstart that for me. And the result is a really cool image to go with a really cool podcast. And I'm honored that you chose me to help you with that.
Of course, I'm honored that you helped me. I'm honored that everything worked out in the way it did, because
worked out
it's
pretty
been
well, didn't it?
Such an amazing journey that has blossomed so many amazing things.
Yeah.
Our relationship being one of them.
Yeah. Who knew?
Yeah.
Who knew? Wow.
So I think with that, the iceberg has been lifted.
I think so too. And it's going to continue to rise with all the amazing
It'll rise infinitely
Yeah.
with each episode.
Oh, for sure. This is going to be great. I'm just so excited for you, and I'm cheering you on, and I hope people who are listening feel inspired to maybe, sit down with Tyler and talk about some cool stuff. And it's really boundless in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the whole point, right? Is to explore these deeper questions of what is and where things come from,
mm-hmm.
and how we can, like I said before, activate our inspired action in the world. What reality are we bringing to this life?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we do that together? And how can we do that separately and create every single nook and cranny in this ultimate mountain, and then reach the mountaintop together?
Yeah.
As Dr. Martin Luther King likes to say, he's been to the mountaintop.
Yeah.
And he wants us all to see that view. He wants us all to be where the angels live, and I think through mediums like this podcast,
mm-hmm.
it's possible to explore that.
Well, I mean, I'll keep asking questions and integrating the unknown and making the unconscious conscious, as Carl Jung would say, and keep exploring. Keep
exploring.
Lifting the iceberg, dissolving the iceberg, melting the iceberg, reforming it.
Shampoo, conditioner, repeat.
And on and on and on. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. And until next time.
Keep on floating.
Let's keep on floating.
Stay buoyant, y'all.
Stay buoyant, y'all. All right. Thank you, Alexa.
Thank you, Tyler.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. I really hope you enjoyed Alexa and I's discussion. You can stay tuned for more episodes by following Lifting the Iceberg on Facebook and Instagram, as well as liftingtheiceberg.com. You can follow Alexa on Instagram at Alexa Spaddy and on Facebook at Alexa Spaddy Art. Be sure to check out her website, alexaspaddy.com, where you can buy a Lifting the Iceberg sticker, as well as some of her other artistic creations. And a big thanks to Kurusu for the soundtrack. The song is called Stay With Me, and you can check him out on Facebook and Spotify.